All right, so um, each week I'm going to talk a little bit about my reactions to Tuesdays with Morrie. And I'd like for you to read the book first and only to read the assigned chapters for that week. Don't read ahead. You could read this book in a night. It's a good book. It's engaging, but just focus on this week's reading, and please read the book before you watch my response for a number of reasons. First of all, it will help you to focus just on that week's readings. For the discussion board, each week we'll be talking about different subjects related to these chapters, and it will allow you to have an authentic response if you react personally before hearing my response. And I'm very interested in hearing your personal responses, and then for you to hear my responses as well. Tuesdays with Morrie is a book about life and death. Most people say it's a book about dying, and I tend to see it as a book about living. It's a book about a relationship between a professor and a student. And the way the book is set up, this book becomes the professor's last class with this student. And he's the only student in the class. And yet we're all students in this last class of Morrie's. I think that it's pretty meaningful to me because of my relationship with many of my own professors. The student, Mitch Album, had a great relationship with his professor, Morrie, but then after he graduated, they lost touch. Life went on, and when he found out that his professor had a terminal illness, he realized that he hadn't kept in touch with this person who gave his life such meaning, and he reconnected, and I think it was a profound connection. I think it's meaningful to me because of my own relationship with my professors. My relationship with professors is probably a little different than yours because it was a different era, a bygone era, perhaps. But it was a lot easier for professors and students to get to know each other on a more personal basis when I went to school. Many of my professors were older, many were ready for retirement. Some have passed away, but I was able to go out to eat with them, to have a drink with them, to travel through India with one of them, to invite them to parties and to go to their parties. So student and professor relationships were very different than they are today. And that's not to say it's right or wrong. I can understand that we need professional boundaries today, and I'm totally okay with that. But I think that we moved from a professional relationship while I was in school to becoming colleagues and working on things professionally together after school, and then becoming friends. So the relationships were ongoing and meaningful. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I highlighted. I'm not going to go through every single page or every single chapter. I want to share with you bits and pieces, snippets that were especially meaningful or insightful to me and share my personal reaction with you. If we look on page 8, Morrie writes about finding out that he has ALS, a terminal illness. And he talks about how the doctor told him that he had this illness. And he asked, "Am I going to die?" And the doctor said yes. And the doctor stayed with him for 2 hours and answered his questions. And he realized that after he went out to his car, the sun was shining and people were going about their business. A woman ran to put money in the parking meter. Another carried groceries. Charlotte had a million thoughts running through her mind. How much time do we have left? How will we manage? How will we pay the bills? My old professor, meanwhile, was stunned by the normalcy of the day around him. Shouldn't the world stop? Don't they know what has happened to me? But the world did not stop, took no notice at all, and as Morrie pulled weakly on the car door, he felt as if he were dropping into a hole. Now what? And I think this was a profound realization for him that he had this news that changed everything. He was going to die, and yet the world was normal. People were going about their business. The world goes on. Life changes, but the world does not change. Goes on to say that the progression of his disease was the end to many things, and perhaps mostly the end to independence. He backed the car out of the garage one morning and could barely push the brakes, and that was the end of his driving. He kept tripping, so he purchased a cane. That was the end of his walking free. Went for his regular swim at the YMCA, but could no longer undress himself, so he hired his first home care worker, a theology student named Tony, who helped him in and out of the pool, in and out of his bathing suit, in the locker room. The other swimmers pretended not to stare. They stared anyhow. That was the end of his privacy. In America, perhaps, one of the most significant changes is the end of our ability to drive. Driving connects very strongly with our sense of independence in the United States. I remember that was a very difficult thing for my father to give up when he became medically blind in his older age from macular degeneration. And for a year after that, his car sat there. He loved to go driving. He loved to drive. He loved cars. And it was a very difficult thing to get rid of that car or to donate that car for him, because it was as if he was losing part of himself, part of his independence. At the end, I wrote, "What would we do or say if we knew we were dying? Because we all are. Every human being is dying. As life goes on, it is a gradual decline. We don't know how we're going to die right now, but we will. We tend to block out that knowledge in our daily lives. It reminds me of a Zen story about a monk, and every day when he woke up, he imagined that a little bird landed on his shoulder and whispered in his ear, "What if today was your last day? How would you live your life?" And I'm wondering that what if we didn't block out this sense of mortality? What if we did live each day as if we were mortal? Would it change the way we live, the way we treated others, the way we treat ourselves, our actions, our decisions? Would these things change? I'm guessing they would. On chapter 18, the next chapter I really wrote something in was called the audiovisual. He wrote bite-sized philosophies about living with death's shadow. Accept what you are able to do, what you are not able to do. Accept the past is past without denying it or discarding it. Learn to forgive yourself and to forgive others. Don't assume that it's too late to get involved. And I wrote, for me personally, it's often more difficult to forgive myself than it is to forgive others. I have a forgiving heart. I find it very easy to forgive others who have wronged me in some way. However, I find it very difficult to forgive myself. I'm often hard on myself. And this is one thing that led to regret therapy, which we'll talk about later in this course. If we continue to dwell on regrets of the past or worries of the future, regrets of the past lead to depression. Worries of the future lead to anxiety. In either case, it's impossible to live in the present or to experience presence of other fully. And we'll get into this a lot more. But acceptance of grace, forgiveness of self, is a very important thing because we're all human, we're all imperfect. Our mistakes are lessons to be learned so that we can become more of who we truly are. Same chapter, page 21, his philosophy was that death should not be embarrassing. He was not about to powder his nose. I decided I'm going to live, or at least try to live, the way I want, with dignity, with courage, with humor, and with composure. And I wrote, what does dignity mean to us? And on the next page, he talks about Ted Koppel, who interviewed him for Nightline a couple times. Koppel seemed extremely taken with Morrie. He asked about the humility that death induced. And I wrote, humility and dignity, are they related? What other words could be included with these things? At the end of each chapter, there's a couple pages of italics. And on page 25, he ends that section with, I hope that one day you will think of me as your friend. And I don't think that is a strange thing to say. When we look at page 27, in our last chapter to read, the orientation, he writes, I did what I had become best at doing. I tended to my work, even while my dying professor waited on his front porch. I'm not proud of this, but that is what I did. Mitch Albom was answering the phone, taking care of work, while his professor was waiting to meet him, sitting on the porch. And I write, how do we each do this in our daily lives? What gives meaning to our lives, and what do we tend to prioritize in our lives? And would that change if we were reminding ourselves of basically our mortality, what truly is important to us? Would that change how we prioritize our day, who we prioritized, what we prioritized? And I think Mitch was beginning to understand that when he wrote that passage. Thanks for listening to my response, and I'm looking forward to reading each of your responses to the first few chapters of this book.